like the new spire and roof, are massive. Notre Dame's huge bells were removed after the fire for cleaning and repair, then returned and tested a few weeks ago.
Whoa, that is pretty powerful to see, to hear those bells, because I've been in France when those bells are ringing, and to know that they are kind of chiming again. Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where I'm dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. In this episode, we're going to talk about what happened on December the 8th in 2024. Basically, the opening of Notre Dame Cathedral after a devastating fire. And we're going to understand a little bit more just about what it took to bring it back to life and to get some spiritual insights, especially in regards to some of the things that I love and some of the things that I don't like. But we're going to get into it in just a moment. But before we do, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. It helps us to get over the suppressions that the internet's algorithms do when it comes to Catholic content. And we try to provide good conversation that really brings about conversion. And so please make sure you do that. And also visit us at patreon.com/thefatherleoshow. And please support us there so that you can get access to some great content and also some special perks, so that we can continue to dish out conversation about the stuff that people are talking about. And the things that we're talking about today is how Catholicism is going to save France, even if it's gone through some major devastations, including burning down the most iconic church in that country. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just kind of review once again what a cathedral is, because a lot of people don't know. It is actually from the Greek cathedra, and that means seat. It is the seat of the archbishop or the bishop of that diocese. And in Paris, it is the archbishop who uses that cathedral as his church, as a type of mother church where everyone comes together to gather as a Catholic family. And yeah, Catholicism is what made France great. And I can honestly say this, I'd like to get a new hat, and it's going to say MAFA. MAFA. Make France mafaga. Let me do it that way instead. It'll be make France great again. And the only way that that can happen is with the Catholic faith. And that's just the God's honest truth. But it's not just Catholicism, but it's the true culture of Catholicism. Because as a cathedral, it is a place for people to come together and do one thing, and that is to worship God. And in that worship, people can experience a salvation. And I remember very clearly 5 years ago when we all saw the devastating fires. And honestly, I don't actually know if that was actually an accident. It just seems strange to me. And there was a lot of debate about what the renovations were going to look like. And Macron, he speaks with dignity, whether you like his policies or not. He's a very kind of, he's definitely a gentleman. He's very demure, if I can say that, very demure. And he said that he was going to rebuild. He was going to rebuild the cathedral in 5 years. Now, this is a cathedral that was around for 860 years. It survived wars. It survived a lot of stuff that could have torn it down, but it stands as a testimony to the Catholic faith of France. And the big question is, do I like, or do you like, or do we as Catholics like the restoration? And I can honestly say, I love it. I love the fact that they retained a lot of the classic designs. I love the fact that it's now brighter than ever. I love the fact that they didn't turn it into something ugly and modern. But I don't necessarily like the altar. I really don't. I mean, let's just take a look at it right now. The altar itself is not that attractive, and there are questions, if I'm taking a look at this right now, you'll see that it just basically looks like kind of like the top of a cup, which I think that's what it's supposed to be. It's just kind of like an oval. And then you see this a lot in a lot of modern art. For example, this is an image from the cathedral in Germany, in Berlin. And you see how everyone is kind of gathered around a circular table, and it just looks like half of a globe. And it's, again, quite modern. Do I like it? No, not at all. Not at all. I think that it's silly. I think it's a cheap version of what is really the highlight. So to be honest with you, as beautiful as the entire cathedral is, it is not to replace what happens on that altar. That is the greatness of France, is what happens on the altar, and it's the consecration of the Eucharist. And that's why I think altars need to be magnificent. And I have to say, it's pretty disappointing to see France kind of cave into the modernist approach because, as some people say, it looks kind of like a Masonic altar. It might be a little bit of a stretch to say that it was Masonic, but it is kind of like that. As I'm looking at this post from Camille Moscow, she basically asked the question, is this new restoration of this new altar, is it kind of similar to the Masonic approach to their sacrifices? It might be a little bit of a stretch. She can't prove that. She just wants to, this Camille Moscow person just wants to kind of get our goat. But I don't want to get you mad. I just want you to focus on what is the most important part of Notre Dame Cathedral. Some might say it's the spires. Some may say it's the rose window. Some may say, oh, it's the centerpiece and the reliquary that held the crown of Jesus. And technically all of those things are magnificent. But the most important thing is the altar. Now, there are two altars. One is the altar of the sacrament. At one point it was known as the high altar, and the high altar is where the tabernacle was. When everyone faced ad orientem, to the east, so the priest had his, in a sense, back to the people, but he was basically looking in the same direction as everybody else. Again, the liturgical documents are encouraging us to look to the east, for that's where the sun rises. So that's what we're talking about. And now with the Mass of the 1965, also known as the Novus Ordo, the New Order, they created altars that would allow people to see the sacrifice, as if to somehow help people participate more. Kind of the unveiling or the moving over of the veil to the sanctuary. We're going to talk a little bit about that in another episode, whether I like the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass, or the Novus Ordo, which is the New Order Mass of Paul VI. Regardless, we're not talking about that now. I just want to focus on the altar, because the altar, again, is the most important part of the church. It is where everyone gathers. And so I just think that the modern altars now are just kind of ugly. And it doesn't, in a sense, give a lot of glory to what's happening on the altar. Now, could it be that people just wanted to keep things simple so that we focus specifically on the altar? Well, let me talk about that in my commentary. But now what I want to do is I want to go to 60 Minutes and kind of extrapolate some salient points, because they did a whole segment in preparation for the grand opening of the Notre Dame Cathedral on December the 8th. Pretty clear. But there was even some debate about that as well. So let's talk about the culture and the cathedral. From what I hear, there was a little bit of disagreement, put it this way, between, say, French President Emmanuel Macron and the Cardinal Archbishop of France. And they were determining when would be the day to open up the cathedral. And the Catholic Archdiocese suggested to do it on December the 8th, which is the feast of Notre Dame Conception Immaculée, the Immaculate Conception, which is obviously a patroness for us in America, but it's a patroness around the world. And it's a beautiful dogmatic proclamation of 1854 that talks about how the Blessed Mother was conceived in absolute purity, without the stain of sin in soul and body. As a Mariologist, that was my degree. This is a big deal. But let's talk about the cathedral, because in this cathedral, they wanted to do it on the 8th, and I think Emmanuel Macron had it pushed a little bit earlier to the vigil on the 7th, in part because the French government obviously contributed a lot of money to it. But I can say that this thing probably cost about $1 billion, but Americans contributed $57 million. That is pretty impressive. But what I also find impressive is kind of like the spirit and the attitude with which this cathedral was rebuilt. Check this out.
When I saw the spire and the lead roof appear, Villeneuve said, when we put the rooster and the cross in place, I felt that a wound had been closed.
The decision to rebuild Notre Dame, it was about our capacity to save, restore, sometimes reinvent what we are by preserving where we come from. This is a message of achievement.
Many of the achievements, like the new spire and roof, are massive. Notre Dame's huge bells were removed after the fire for cleaning and repair, then returned and tested a few weeks ago.
Whoa, that is pretty powerful to see, to hear those bells, because I've been in France when those bells are ringing, and to know that they are kind of chiming again. What I loved about this little clip here on 60 Minutes is the fact that they wanted to restore it. Now, I kind of take a little umbrage to this idea of reinventing, but I think I know what he's talking about, so I'm not here to pick a fight with the seculars of France. But I can say that they at least have a respect for beauty and history and culture. And that's why I'm really happy about this restoration. Not all of it. Again, that altar, it's pretty boring. Now, again, what's most important is what happens on the altar, but it really shows how, from an artistic point of view, they really don't understand theology, because that just needs to be highlighted as a massive attention getter. That's why we actually bow to the altar. We genuflect to the tabernacle. But all the other things that kind of took place, it was really a healing from a wound. I mean, that was Philippe Villeneuve. He's the artistic director who kind of oversaw the entire cleaning and not the cleaning, excuse me, the artistic design. So he did a good job and everything else. From what I understand too, in the spire itself, they have some outward hooks. He actually attached his face to one of the hooks itself. You can watch the whole 60 Minutes interview here, and you can see how he did that. But that was something that a lot of the great artists did when they, painted the Sistine Chapel or the Last Judgment, the Final Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. But the idea of putting your face is just you putting a part of it all. And what I really appreciate in Emmanuel Macron's statement is that he wanted to just bring it back to its glory. But the only way you can do that, honestly, is if you're willing to clean up the mess that was left behind, proverbially, allegorically, and realistically. Check this out.
Painting restorer Diana Castillo has been working in the many small chapels of Notre Dame. Diana shared photos and video of what the chapels and paintings looked like, cloudy and dim, and their appearance now.
It's really striking. If you continue watching that video, you're going to see them with paint brushes brushing off the soot that came from the fire's ash, but also tremendous amount of dust. Just the dust is all over the place, and it can dim. And for me, I look at this and I think, wow, this is a real sign of almost God using this tragedy, really. When the cathedral burned down, I was actually very emotional, just very, very emotional about the whole thing. It happened a year before COVID, and that year was just getting crazy because an upcoming election season was happening, and you could almost feel people's anxieties kicking in. And so when this cathedral burned down, it almost started a chain reaction of a bunch of other churches being burned down. But in a sense, this was a wake-up call for the people of France to, in a sense, realize that the most iconic structure that brings the entire country of France together, Notre Dame, Our Lady, the mother church, so that her son can be worshiped, was destroyed. And I saw videos of young people praying the rosary and singing Marian hymns. God, it brought tears to my eyes. But we had no idea how beautiful this thing is. I mean, if you were just to keep watching this, you can almost see how once they remove the dust from over 800 years, 8 centuries, 860 years that this cathedral had been in place without cleaning all those intricacies, you saw the difference. And it really is an analogy of our souls. We need to be renewed. And yes, sometimes we go through some very challenging things only so that we can be rebuilt. And so here's what I want to do. I want to give you my commentary on what this whole experience of seeing the renovations, what it means to me in my commentary. A church is more than a set of walls and art. And it's more than just even having a name. It is, as we have always understood in Catholic theology, to be the body of Christ. The physical nature of the church is a sanctuary. It's a holy place. It's a place where things happen that the world cannot provide. The church is in the midst of the world, but it is not of the world. And so when a church burns down, and I want to refer you to an episode a few months back where I talk about the amount of Catholic church burnings that have happened, particularly since Notre Dame. This was almost, in a sense, a chain reaction. I honestly don't think that Notre Dame was a sheer accident. I really don't. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just have seen enough evidence to suggest that, yeah, while the roof was old and it was made out of wood, my gosh, people should have been extra careful because of that. But this fire was just raging, and we will never necessarily know the source of the fire. We know that fire ultimately is the, in a sense, eternal punishment in hell. So fire in the hands of God is used to warm things. It's used to purify things, and it's used to cook things. In the hands of the evil one, it is a way to destroy you. Like, for example, even the body of great French mystic and soldier, captain of an army in the Battle of Orléans, Saint Joan of Arc. She was destroyed by fire, but something came out of that. And I just think that what we've got to do is remember that anything that the devil tries to use to destroy us, you've got to put back in the hands of God. And that which was at one point a weapon turns into a work of art. I think the cross is a perfect example of that. You take a cross, it's what was used to kill Jesus. You put it in Jesus's hands, or his hands were attached to it, that is, and it turns into an instrument of hope. This is amazing for us. So I think that this whole cathedral being burned down was really an opportunity for a great wake-up call for the people of France. Now, I just finished filming and editing with our producers for EWTN. I don't know if many of you know this, but I have a TV show on EWTN called Savoring Our Faith. It's a travel, faith, and food show. And this past season, we filmed in France as well as looked at the French influence in French Canada, so Quebec and Montreal. And I got to tell you, what French people's faith did was just absolutely amazing. Sadly, both of those countries are incredibly secular now, and it honestly, it's decaying before our very eyes. I think that while in my conspiratorial mind thinks that this was no accident, this burning of Notre Dame 5 years ago was no accident, I also don't get upset about it because I know that God can use this to rebuild. Not rebuild the structure, but in a sense, rebuild the faith. But we've got to see how much neglect created this environment for the burning in the first place. And so I want to just play one more clip here so that you can see my commentary and what I think needs to happen.
So in this climate, how important is it to have a project like this that unifies rather than divides?
We speak about a moment of unity and pride. And this is exactly what our nations need. Why don't we try to fix other, perhaps more abstract, but very important big issues of our countries?
So the impossible is not impossible, huh?
Definitely, it's French motto. Impossible is not French.
Yeah, and it might not be part of the vocabulary in a sense of the fresh mindset, because nothing is impossible with God. And what was really sad to me is that I watched this whole 60-minute interview and there was not mention of God. There was not mention of religion. There was not mention of faith. There was implications of faith, but there was no mention of even Catholicism, for God's sakes. And that's what frustrates me about the way we are approaching this past December 8th incredible, monumental celebration. Not just the Immaculate Conception, but the grand opening of Notre Dame's Cathedral after a devastating fire. So kudos to the many people who put in so much effort to rebuild this. It really is a work of art and really semi-miraculous. But it saddens me that the secularization almost kicks God out of that possibility equation. They did this with just money. But remember, Notre Dame was originally built by the pennies and the nickels of the poor. And most importantly, was built by the faith of the Catholic French people. And that's what I'd like to end with. Just a real admonition to the French people. Get your faith back. If not, this cathedral is going to turn into just a museum and a tourist industry. And if we are not careful, this cathedral could turn into a mosque. But the only way that that's not going to happen is if you have the faith to rebuild the true church, which is the body of Christ. Make sure that your faith is built up in you. And if you experience tragedies and challenges and the fires from hell, know that it is just a way. If you put that fire in God's hands, it will purify you and make you stronger. And it's not going to reinvent your Catholic faith, but it will certainly reinvigorate it. So my prayer is for the French people to get their Catholic faith back again. It really is the only way that France will be great. again. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. And please make sure you support us on our Patreon so that we can continue to dish out faith, culture, and commentary. God bless you, and stay hungry for God.